Welcome to this week's edition of the Reigns on the Cardinals podcast. Rob Reigns, Mike Reigns from our STL Sports Stage studio. And Mike, the Mets tried to help the Cardinals out. They did their best to kind of keep the Cardinals in the race for that third wild card spot as long as possible. But the Cardinals, unfortunately, on Wednesday night fell out of the race.
It is a little frustrating when you sit back and look at it, right? The positive takeaway is there's 3 games left of the season. So it took until game 159 for the Cardinals to be no longer in contention to make the playoffs.
Which I think if you probably said in the first week of April that would happen, you probably would have been okay with that based on what your expectations were for this season.
And I think you would, right? But if you also look at how they played in the month of May, you'd look back and say, this team's a playoff team. But then you look at the rest of the season, and it certainly fell short of expectations, I would say.
I would say this too. I would say, and you talk about this all the time. Every season we talk about it when you play 162 games and you call it a marathon and not a sprint. But every year it seems like the end of September you're sprinting to try to get into the playoffs. And it just goes to show, and people talk about it all the time, but those games that you lose in April and May can still sometimes hurt when you get to September.
And it's easy to look back right now and say, like, hey, those games in Seattle, we either had a lead or we went into extras every game. And, one of them goes your way, it's a different story. But there's certainly countless other games we could look back on this season and say there's a 1-run ball game here, or we blew a big lead here. I mean, it's hard to think about it in June, but every game really does matter.
And I would think this too. I would think, and I'm not sure one is better than the other. I always say, like, which is a better loss, 13-0 or 1-0, But I think that the other part about this is too, though, that this was a club that you really, to me, the expectations were it was going to be about a 500 club when you came into this season. We just didn't think they had enough pitching. That's the way it's played out over the course of the season. But I also think that you found out a lot about players in this year. And I think if you're going to be in this position where you get eliminated, the last week of the season, it's probably better to have never been in that position than to be going through what Detroit's going through right now.
For sure. Absolutely. They're really struggling. And it's interesting when you look back on it and say, it's easy to look back and second guess moves, right? So the question that I want to know is, if we took Eric Fetty out earlier this year and put McGreevy in, does this team have a better record?
Sure.
It certainly would look that way, right? So,
or if you found a way to get Andre Palante out of the rotation at some point.
And I think it's, there's a coin flip on these, right? Because you were able to trade Helsley, who didn't have that good of a year and blew a few games for us, whereas if Helsley was playing the way that he was last year, maybe that saves the back end of the bullpen. It's a different story.
And you also look at it, if the Cardinals had played better in June and July and have been in a different position that they got to the trading deadline, maybe they would have held on to a couple of those relief pitchers. Although you have to say that the guys that stepped up by and large, I think, in the bullpen after those trades did a good job. I mean, I think you look at the body of work. Now, did they have hiccups? Sure, everybody has hiccups. But if you look at the overall body of work of Swanson and Leahy and Romero and O'Brien, the second half of the season, I think you have to come away with that as a positive.
Very much so, right? And I think the key to this season, we got to remember, was a runway, right? And it was a rebuild. And so how do we evaluate the guys that were able to get time? And I think we'll sit back and look at that as we progress through the offseason. And that's what we'll do, is we'll deep dive into some of these guys, how they progress now and what's the next step for them. But overall, I think, the positive is this team was in contention for a while. The negative is this team really never had it. And we probably could have told you they weren't a playoff team a long time ago.
Yeah, I think what were they, a season high 9 games over 500 in May at one point, but then obviously the rest of the season didn't go that well. 3 games left in the regular season. The Cardinals will end up the year in Chicago. They need to sweep the Cubs to get to 500. I don't know if the actual record really makes a difference at this point. They're sitting home for the October for the 3rd playoff season in a row. That to me is the bigger concern. And I think that the transition, runway transition, whatever, I think it's coming at a good time. I really think this organization right now needs a fresh start, and that's hopefully what they're going to get with Chaim Bloom taking over.
And I think there's multiple ways to look at this fresh start, right? Because there's the one side of looking at this season and saying, hey, it took until game 159 to get eliminated, so we're not that far off. And then you look at the other side, and this team really struggled in a lot of places, right? And the one key stat for me that has to change for next year, this team had a negative 48 run differential. Now, we'll see where it ends on the season here, but That's absolutely terrible. You want to say, why can't we be more like the Brewers? Do you know what the Brewers run differential is?
Plus 120?
Plus 175.
70. Wow, that's more than I would have guessed.
175 more
They
runs
play the game the
scored.
right way.
And
they run, they steal bases, they play great defense, they get good pitching. I mean, they're
what
the Cardinals want to be.
What does it take for the Cardinals to get there? That's the question that Chaim has to figure out.
Yeah. And I think the thing to me too is you talk about, okay, well, we went to game 159 before they're eliminated. That's before they were eliminated from the third wild card spot. They're going to finish this year, 18, 19 games behind Milwaukee in the division race. To me, that should be your goal. I mean, your goal should not be to be the third wild card team. Your goal ought to be the division champions and or the World Series champions.
What was Mo's goal every year?
To get in the playoffs.
And he didn't care if it was the third wild card slot. He just wanted to get in. Well,
I think that has to change.
Now we've missed the playoffs for 3 consecutive seasons. So what is Chaim's mindset here? Is it to get in or is it to win the division?
A couple of people who I've actually working on a story about Chaim that's going to run, hopefully next week after the official news conference, after he officially takes over. A couple of people that I've talked to who have known him for a long time have talked about how competitive he is. And to me, that's a very positive sign for this team. If he's going to be a competitive guy with a desire to win, I think that's a fresh attitude that this team needs.
And the challenge that I see right now is how quick does it take to get there?
Right.
And I think that's the question mark for everybody right now, is because as much as we don't want to talk about it, as much as we're, want to get better right now, I still think the overarching thing at the end of next season, they're worried about the new CBA contract. And I think it's going to be a little bit longer of a process than we think, because without going too much in depth with it, because we'll talk about that as we progress, but the owners are going to want a salary cap because they don't want to play these players what they want.
No.
And the players don't want that. They want as much money as they can make. So there's going to be how long before somebody gives in? So the question is, what can you do next year without locking up too much salary so that you're on the hook, not knowing what's happening with the new contracts?
And that was kind of the goal for this season. If you look back at the moves that the Cardinals didn't make last winter, didn't talk about extending anybody, was to make the playing field as fresh as possible for when Chaim takes over, to have as many all the decisions going forward on his plate. Have very few players under contract beyond this season for the Cardinals, and I think that was by design, that they didn't try to extend any of the guys. And that gets us into I think the two biggest moves the Cardinals have to think about this winter, and there'll be a lot of them that will break down as the winter progresses. But the news of the day after the Cardinals game on Wednesday night, Sonny Gray making his final start of the season, told the Derek Gould and John Denton and Katie Wu, the reporters who are on scene in San Francisco, that he would be willing to consider waiving his no trade clause this winter, depending on what happens and the direction that the team is going in. That could be a big move. And then, of course, you've also got the whole Nolan Arenado situation.
And I think as we dive into Sonny, the question for me is, Sonny's played 11 seasons prior to coming here. He's thrown back-to-back seasons with the Cardinals of 200 strikeouts. Mm-hmm. He's only done that one other year throughout his career. So when we look at Sonny, and I understand he's owed a lot of money, but who are the starters on this team next year? We don't have 5 starters.
No.
So why would we want to dump one who's been A, healthy, and B, a strikeout pitcher? When we talk about the defense hasn't held up this year and we need swing and miss stuff, why are we going to dump someone who's doing those things?
I would think there's 2 things. One is if you do want to get that salary relief, the $35 million he's owed, plus an option for 2027, and or if you can get younger and more depth. I mean, more, like maybe you trade him and get 2 starting pitchers. I'm not, I think that's going to be the biggest questions they have to decide is if he, I can make an argument why it makes sense to trade him, and I can make an argument why it makes sense to keep him. So I think that's going to be the balancing act is okay, who is interested that he would agree to go to? We've heard rumblings of a couple of teams. Atlanta, maybe number 1, is going to be looking for starting pitchers. Atlanta is actually a closer drive to Nashville than St. Louis. We've also heard overtures about the San Francisco Giants. Why? Because Bob Melvin used to be Sonny Gray's manager in Oakland. So I think there are a couple of teams that he might be agreeable to, especially a club that maybe thinks they have a better chance to win than the Cardinals. But again, what you get back in return is going to be the key, because like you mentioned, if you tried to name how many names could you fill into the Cardinals starting rotation right now for 2026, if you don't have Sonny Gray.
And there are guys that are in AAA that
Three.
maybe could come up, but what's the question mark with them? A, they've never pitched up here, and B, the top candidates have been injured. So you're worried about the longevity of them throughout the season. And I think starting pitching health is one of the most important things because you just need guys to throw innings. And so to me, I don't see trading someone who is stayed healthy and has been a big piece of this rotation. Now, yes, he has had some bad games, but I'd rather him pitch than Palante or Michaelis.
To me, I just see him being a better fit for a second or third starter too. I just don't know that he's a number one starter. Now I don't know they have one.
He's not, but we don't have one. That's the problem.
By default.
And so I think that, could this team go and get a number one? Sure. And that would, really, I think we're two good pitchers away from having a good team here. Mm-hmm. Because if all of a sudden McGreevy and Libby are your 4 and 5, that's a different story here. But what pieces do you have to get that 1 and 2 out there? And I don't know that
when you're not going to spend the money to do it.
I don't know that trading Sonny is the answer to getting a better pitcher.
How do you feel about Arenado?
Now that becomes the question, right? Now, if you're able to trade Arenado and somebody takes part of that salary and you've saved $17 million by having Michaelis not on the books anymore, are you okay with Sonny's salary then? Mm-hmm. So that's
a question that Bill DeWitt has to answer. What the payroll is going to be.
To me, the first question answered and the first move has to be Nolan Arenado because I think he dictates every other move from there. Because if Arenado can't go somewhere, then it's time to look at trading some combination of Gorman, Sajaci, maybe Jordan Walker. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm just saying you've got too many guys again for next year if Nolan's still going to be here.
I do think from Arenado's standpoint, I don't think he wants to go through a winter like last year either. I think he realizes he's going to have to expand his list, include some more teams that he'd be willing to go to, agree to some other, the Cardinals have to agree to eat part of that contract and then, lower their expectations about what they're going to get in return just to be able to move that contract. So.
And I don't think he wants to be here anymore. You look at that home run he hit in San Francisco. Did you see the lack of emotion on his face? He didn't care. There was nothing no emotion at all. So why do we want someone like that on this team? So, and a lot of people questioned right after the trade deadline when we saw what we did, was he actually hurt or was he hurt because we sold everything off?
And that to me is the part of the thing too. I think it applies to Sonny Gray too, is that if the Cardinals are not going to be a contending team in 2026, what moves could they make that would make them a contending team sooner rather than later? And to me, that's where you have to look at what you could get back for both of those guys. I understand your point about not having somebody to replace them in the rotation, but to me, I look at the big picture of not just, if you keep Sonny Gray, are you better than a 500 team in 2026? Right now, I don't think so. You could be, depending on what other moves you make. But
I think getting rid of Palante and Michaelis is going to change a lot, right? Because you're not going to give up so many runs to start with, and we're not going to run through the Eric Fetty experiment again. So I think right there, that makes you a better ball club to start with. But the problem is who's filling those last 2 spots, and are they better?
This is Mike Raines here on the Raines on the Cardinals podcast on STLSportsPage.com. Of course, our podcast and all of our programming and stories here on STL Sports Page brought to you in part by our great friends at the Drury Hotels. We've got some fall travel plans coming up. Be sure to check out their website, druryhotels.com. You also can get the link to theirs, add to that website just off of our site and see if they've got a hotel where you're going. We always a lot of times go to Phoenix for the Arizona Fall League. They've got a lot of great hotels in the Phoenix area, so some great hotels in Florida. So encourage you to check them out. All right, so I'm going to throw – you mentioned a little bit. There were 2 other guys with no trade clauses. One is Miles Michaelis. I don't think he's going to be back, but you never know. At least that no trade clause will go away because he becomes a free agent after the season. So if he might be gone. But then here's the other guy, Wilson Contreras. What do you think?
Well – the thing is about Wilson, I don't think what you're paying him is a terrible contract for what you're getting. I think they did a good deal on that. So I think if he stays, that's okay. But Contreras kind of is one of those guys that A, has said he wants to be a part of this team and wants to be here. Mm-hmm. And B, when he's healthy, that's a veteran bat you need in this lineup. And he's played very well at first base.
But the downside of that, the flip side of that would be you also have somebody who could play first base and has had a very good season and is a lot younger and a lot cheaper in Alec Burleson.
If I'm comparing the two, people aren't going to like this, but Alec Burleson is the better option to trade because he's got more value. So you want to find a number one starter, a number two starter, Alec Burleson's the guy to do that for you, I think. Now, does that significantly change this lineup? Because was he one of the big hitters? Yes. So then you're banking on Gorman and Walker to figure it out. But if that's the plan, you need pitching.
They are going to have
pitching.
I think that to get to where they want to get to, or what we think they want to get to, because they haven't said yet, is they're going to, and not being able to go out and spend heavily on the free agent market, because normally that's not what they do anyway. And then especially given the parameters of that lower attendance, the lockout coming in 27, I just don't see them being a very active participant on the high end of the free agent market. Can they find some, backup guys, bench guys, whatever, bullpen guys? Yeah, probably. But the top end of it, I just don't see them being a player for those guys. So you're going to have to get better by trades. And to get better players in here by trades, you're going to have trade somebody that somebody else wants that's going to give you something better than what you have. And to do that, I really think they're going to be positioned for the first time, probably in a long time, they're going to have to make an uncomfortable trade. They're going to have to trade somebody that they know is a good player, that they know is going to be productive somewhere else, but it's the right move to make for this team.
And with Wilson Contreras, having a no trade clause is tough, right? And first base is a position that is a tough position to trade, because that's typically where, your veteran big hitters are at. And there's not a lot of openings right now at first base. If I had to guess, there's a few, there's not a ton, but Contreras is signed through 2028. So you've got him locked into a contract. You know what's there. As you're looking at the progression of this,
I think it's 27. I think he's got 2 years to go. I think.
Okay,
you can check. While
so as we look through this, though, the interesting thing is, and the question that Chaim's got to figure out is Burleson the guy, or is Blaze Jordan, who's sitting in Memphis, the guy? And if Blaze is the guy, when is that time frame right for him? So does the Contreras contract make sense? Because Burleson would be here longer.
Yeah, and I think the two things that the Cardinals have to get more power. I mean, that's number one. Contreras is going to lead this team with 20 home runs, unless Herrera or Burleson hits a couple home runs this weekend in Chicago. And you've got to get. We talked about the other part of it, the pitching side of it. You've got to get more swing and miss pitchers, starting pitchers and bullpen. So that's the two biggest needs. It's how you get them. So that brings me to this next question: if you're going to figure out guys that have value, but what are we going to do with them? I think the guy who's first and foremost on that list right now, to me, is Ivan Herrera. He wants to catch. He's going to have some off-season surgery, which they think are going to clean up some bone chips in his elbow, which they think has caused part of the problems for throwing when he was catching earlier this year. He's going to spend the winter supposedly working out, trying to catch. He wants to catch. The whole left field experiment apparently is dead because it never went anywhere after the 4 games in the middle of August. Is he too young to be a full-time DH and just leave him in that spot? I don't know. To me, it's going to be fascinating what they decide to do about Ivan Herrera.
It's going to be very interesting. To me, I see 5 position players as the best trade options to bring you something back. There's 5 guys. Herrera's one of them. I think Burleson's another. And again, just because I'm mentioning these names doesn't mean I know anything that they're going to be traded. Or, like we've talked about, there's going to be some uncomfortable names here. I think next is Brendan Donovan. The next guy I'd put on the list, Lars Nootbaar. And then the Arenado, obviously. So those are the 5 to me: Arenado, Burleson, Herrera, Donovan, and Nootbaar. Because those are the 5 that I think people would want something for. Has Arenado played great? No, but you know what Arenado is capable of doing, and you're getting it for his defense as well. I think regardless, we're going to see the hit defensively there. But when you look at Donovan and Nootbaar, there's still young guys that have shown that they can play every day, can play the position, can play well and hit well and run. And if you want starting pitching, it's clearly not here in our system, so it's got to come from somewhere else.
And both of those guys are 2 years away from free agency. They're going to start making money. They went to arbitration last year. Both of them made in the $3 million range. So you're looking at probably going to $5 to $6 million this year if they don't sign a long-term deal. And you know that if the club is not a contending club, they could very well choose to walk in 2 years. So to me, somebody always said it's better to trade a guy a year too late than a year too soon than a year too late. And that to me would be the situation. You would get more for both of those guys this winter than you would next winter.
And it's always interesting to pick which guy to be traded, right? Mo's been doing a lot of media and talking to a lot of people now about his time here, and he was talking on the 101 the other day to those guys about how it came down to Randy Rosarina or Tyler O'Neill, and they picked the wrong one. Well, that could end up being, Lars Nootbaar versus somebody else, and they end up picking the wrong one, right? Mm-hmm. That's going to happen at some point. But what we've shown is this team can't win with what they have. So what is our best option to get something better to make them a contending team sooner?
So of the 30 players that they have on the roster, the 28 players who are on the roster right now, plus Wynn and Contreras, who are on the injury list for this weekend series in Chicago, when we get to opening day, March 26th, not even spring training, we get to opening day, March 26th, 2026, how many of those 30 players do you think will still be here?
Well, the interesting thing is, how many do I actually think, or how many do I want? Because there's a
you can answer that question.
There's
both
a difference
ways.
In that, right? You're always going to see turnover in the bullpen, right? So there's always going to be a change in guys there. So I would say of the guys that are here, you're probably going to see 20 to 21 still on this team, is my opinion, because I don't see Heim completely blowing this up. Mm-hmm. I see him making some moves to try to get better, but not going crazy to start with. Now, how many should be on this team? That number is probably closer to like 12 to 15.
We expect to hear from Heim next week after the transition, after the season is over. We'll start to get some answers to some of those questions about what he has planned. And I think the more important question that we need to answer probably before any of the player talk is concerning is what's the future of Ali Marmol and the coaching staff.
And before we get into that, how many do you think are going to be on this team?
I would say between 15 and 20. I would say between the half and a third will go, depending on the moves and depending on like Gray and Contreras and some of those.
For sure. Guys. Obviously those matter.
So, they've got to clear up the logjam. They've got to clear up the too many left-handed hitting middle infielders. They've got to open a spot for Weatherholt to play. They've got to find somebody who can hit home runs and be a corner outfielder. So
and a right-handed hit
would help.
But so now,
but that could be Herrera, and they just would stick him in left field and leave him alone. I don't know.
They claim he's going to catch.
That's what they said. So two other things.
So now as we talk about Ali, though.
Yeah, just that's going to be, to me, he's under contract for next year. There's been no indication that they're planning on making a change or extending him or whatever. So we'll get the answer to that hopefully next week when we hear from Heim at a news conference, probably on Tuesday.
There's two ways to look at how Ali's kind of handled this season. One is he can only do so much with the players that he has.
Correct.
And these players have not performed the way that they should. So that's step one. Step two is I don't know that Ali knows the right strengths to pull when it comes to his bullpen and his starters. And that's one weakness that we've always thought that he's had is he pulls starters a little bit too early and goes to the bullpen because he likes to play the matchups based on the analytics. So is that Ali or is that Dusty Blake? And does getting a new pitching coach kind of change some of that? Or what people have said for a long time is how much is Mo controlling this, who plays where because of the analytics for it? So what's Heim going to do when that changes, right? So I'm very curious to see how this plays out.
Should be a fascinating offseason. We've got 3 games, of course, to go before we get to that point. We'll have more time to talk about the winter as we go through October and sit at home and watch other teams playing again. The other 2 things I want to get into real quickly that happened this week, big news in baseball as far as one thing we do know is going to be different about 2026 is the automatic ball strike system is coming. The challenge system is coming to the major leagues. It was approved by the competition committee and approved by the Players Association. So people who are familiar with that system is going to work the same way it did in the minor leagues. You get 2 challenges. If you're right, you keep the challenges, and if you're wrong, you lose them. Only the batter, the pitcher, and the catcher are the 3 people who can challenge something. So and I think that's a good thing. I think I would be against the total robot umpires, but I think having this challenge system is a good way to get calls right.
And having seen it in the minors, it's quick. It's a very quick
fast
system the way that it works. So I think as we're moving to this world of more replay, I think we need to make more things reviewable to get the game right. I'm happy the ABS system's coming. I wish, in the case of Jordan Walker the other day when he fouled the ball off his foot, I wish fair foul was reviewable and some of those things that I wish they could expand a little bit farther. Since we have it, why not use it on everything?
Sure. And I think the other thing we have to do is we have to congratulate the Springfield Cardinals. They win the AA Texas League Championship. They beat Midland 13-1 on Wednesday night blowout in the third game, final game of that best-of-3 series. So congratulations to them. First championship for that team since 2012. So that bodes well for the future. I think you had the MVP of the Texas League and J.J. Weatherholt, even though he only played half the season there. Moved up to Memphis. You had the pitcher of the year in Eshawn Henderson, who had a couple, some great starts in the playoffs. Is a guy that I think you're going to see in spring training next year. Whether he, has where he is as far as making this club is concerned, depends on all the other moves that they make. Spent the whole year at AA, and then you had the manager of the year, Patrick Anderson. So congratulations to all of the people involved in that team. Would obviously spent some time in Springfield over the course of the season. It was a fun environment, and congratulations to them for winning that championship.
Congratulations for sure. Definitely very exciting for them. But what it tells you too is we're getting the right guys in the system. They're just not here yet, but they're coming and they're working through and they're getting ready. So, guys that are in AA are probably a year or two away. So we're close. The other thing that wouldn't surprise me this year, just based on kind of how things are playing out, if the Cardinals are willing to take on more veteran contracts for guys that are just on a year contract.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't know the deal that is going to happen again this season.
True.
I'd be wondering if Heim's going to go out and look for some of these to fill some of these roles. Do you go out and find a veteran starter that just wants one more year to pitch, or a guy that just wants one more year to play?
The other guy, of course, I wanted to mention in Springfield, who had a great season, even though he wasn't the league MVP, but made the All-Star team, was Joshua Baez. We've talked about him before, and he's going to be a guy I think it's going to be exciting to watch in spring training, and then obviously he'll probably start the year in Memphis. But he's a guy that may be that outfielder that we need coming along too. So
and that's why there's some question marks when it comes to the trading of the outfielders, because right now you've got one too many, and so does Walker figure it out? Does Walker become a trade candidate? What about Nathan Church? He's played really well. He's a young guy. Is that somebody that people would want, just from a defensive standpoint? And then we talk about Victor all the time. You need to get him up to leadoff, and you see what happens.
Yeah, the Walker and Gorman are going to be interesting because to me, their trade value is down now because of the seasons that they had. Somebody would try to get them, I'm sure, because they thought they could get them at a discount, and they probably think that they could fix them, that they could see what's wrong and what they can do to get better. So those are going to be moves that the going to be interesting to watch too. So 3 games left in Chicago, and then we'll be able to dive full blown into the off season. We'll have to be back with another Reigns of the Cardinals podcast next week, depending on what happens with the news conferences early in the week. We may have a special edition to talk about. We'll see what comes up that. Bears some conversation.
My one final question.
Okay.
Do the Cardinals finish with a 500 record?
No.
That would require a sweep of the Cubs. And it may not matter here. The Cubs may not be
playing.
Yeah,
Cubs are locked. I think they're locked into the second wild card.
It may not make a difference, right? So
yeah, be interesting to see. So we'll have all the action covered for you this weekend as the Cardinals wrap up in Chicago and then on to the postseason. So thanks for tuning into this edition of the Reigns on the Cardinals podcast. Have a great day, everybody.